I'm well, man. We're going live, brother.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on whatever time zone that you're in. I am probably more excited about being able to listen to these two gentlemen talk than anything that I can remember in recent memory. Santiago did a fantastic moment in time with us. So is Jerry. And I'm really looking forward to being able to kind of sit back and listen to these two guys have a great crypto conversation. And Jerry, would you like to introduce yourself? And then Santiago can introduce himself. And then I'll kind of go in, fade a little bit into the background and look for questions for you guys out of the chat.
Sure. Well, my name is Jerry Hall, obviously, and I am a retired contractor living in Costa Rica who's become, over the last 3 years, a crypto enthusiast and a student on a path of financial literacy. And it's a wonderful combination of two things, right? Learning about money and how the economies work and monetary policy, etc., as well as markets, and then introducing the tech of crypto. It's the perfect marriage. So I am happy to be here tonight.
And my name is Santiago Velez. I'm co-founder of a company called Block Digital Corporation. We're dedicated to essentially supporting Web 3.0 decentralization, which includes blockchain type projects. And like Jerry, I've gone down a similar rabbit hole around the nature of money, crypto markets, and policy. So, we're like-minded, and I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
So should we just take it away, Scott, or do you have more that you'd like to contribute?
Absolutely. I'd like you two to just have yourselves a dandy little conversation. And if I feel like that I've just got to ask something, I will. But I'm just excited to hear the two of you have a great crypto conversation. And then I'll be on the lookout for any questions that come into the chat.
All right. Well, so I have a question for you, Santi, and that is, so offline, Santiago and I have had the good fortune of being able to communicate. And one of the things that you brought up about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were talking about the history of Bitcoin and then looking at comparatively the history of Ripple and XRP, specifically the asset XRP, and focusing on its growth as it pertains to market cap. And I'm curious where that narrative has gone since the last time we spoke. So if you could bring us up to speed with what made you even think about it in those terms and what's developed for you or what you've learned as a result.
I guess, well, first of all, for me, it was discovering what everybody else discovers eventually when you get into these markets, that everything is very highly correlated to Bitcoin. And so then you ask yourself, well, exactly why is that? And what's really going on underneath the surface, given that many digital asset projects have come out at different points in time, right? Bitcoin was the first, it's the largest. And is there really some underlying phenomenon there that, is not very clear because of all the noise in the space and because of all the complexity and because of all the different projects? And, so I started going down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out if there's kind of some underlying principles that drive it all, right? So, at a surface level, you could say that Bitcoin is kind of this gateway for crypto, right? It has the brand, it's widely known publicly, and so people kind of enter into Bitcoin, and then from there they expand out into other projects, right? So I think that's that's an adequate explanation, but I tend to try to look for more quantitative reasons for things like that. So I've started to explore different representations of Metcalfe's law. And what Metcalfe's law is essentially this mathematical principle that derived from telecommunications networks. And it's essentially that each individual is a node in a network. And as you add more and more individuals to a network, that they scale via a particular formula, right? And it's a nonlinear type of scalability. And the thing with Metcalfe's law is that each network is essentially this group of people that are trying to interact, and the network itself gives rise to like this emergent property that's greater than the sum of the parts, right? It's like this holistic effect. So when I look at Bitcoin as a network or any other digital asset, I also look at other networks, right? So I don't think it's a good idea to look at networks in isolation. I think you have to look at networks with respect to other networks. So, for example, fiat and dollars are obviously the largest monetary network on the planet, right? It's the global reserve currency. So what would motivate somebody to go from one network where they can transact with people to another? What are the motivations? And then I try to make an analogy to like social networks. So what were the reasons maybe people left MySpace to go to Facebook? Or why did they go to Twitter? Or why did they go to Reddit or any other large social network? And what I think I've discovered is that all of these social networks and now value networks have some kind of proposition that the users are intending to enjoy. And that value proposition has to be greater than the switching costs. All right. So the switching costs are all the things that we're trying to do with education. When you're trying to take somebody from fiat who doesn't understand crypto, the switching costs are, a learning curve that's really steep. Understanding how wallets work, exchanges, going through the process of transferring money at different places, maybe not having conviction around your investment. So there's kind of this large barriers to entry into the digital asset space. And I consider those switching costs from a network perspective. So I see, the switching costs going from fiat to Bitcoin as very, very high. But once somebody overcomes those switching costs, once they get comfortable moving from fiat to Bitcoin, then making the leap from Bitcoin to all these other things is very, very low, because the core competencies are there, right? You know what a wallet is, you know how to use an exchange, you know how to do you have some basic toolkit that then gives you the confidence to explore other things. So when you look at the lens of, this monetary network of fiat and then networks like Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, what you start seeing is that as the switching costs go down, liquidity follows with it. So Bitcoin tends to rally before the rest of the market by, sometimes months, maybe even a year. And then all the quote unquote altcoins or alternative coins rally in price along with it. And that to me is kind of this manifestation of going from one network to the other when the switching costs are low and the value proposition is high, right? So if Bitcoin has appreciated and maybe people feel that it's too expensive, or maybe that they're not comfortable with how fast it appreciated, they might look at these alternatives and say, well, they're still fairly low in price. I can get in on this and capture some of that appreciation early, and they're not as large in market cap. So, they see more of kind of an outperformance angle there. So that's kind of what I've been constructing in my mind for a while on network effects. So I don't know. I'm sorry I went down that long rabbit hole, but
no, that was a very elegant description, and I will tell you that I came up with a lot of the same points you did. I was not able to articulate them in one sitting like you did. It's been years, and I think there is like this, like you said, there's a learning curve, a switchover cost, right? This learning curve is, once we can identify some of the major hurdles, because you've got glossary, right? The glossary of terms. Well, the truth of the matter is there's absolutely no difference between an account and a wallet, functionally. But if somebody hears wallet, they're drawing an association to something different than an account. But really, that's all a wallet is an account. It happens to be your account or the exchange's account or whatever. If we can get through some of these things and create shortcuts and start chopping that learning curve down, we can affect the adoption rate. And I think that's the whole point of why I'm doing what I'm doing, why you're doing what you're doing in the public space, why Scott's doing Crypto Siege, all these folks. We're trying to knock down the learning curve so that the folks that are coming after us don't need to spend 3 years in the space to be able to interact and interface with this incredible new technology. So I was curious, putting a bow on this particular topic, if you've been able to quantify certain things that we could apply to future endeavors regardless of the project name.
Yeah, I mean, looking from the lens of network effects, you start to see patterns that, like for example, if you take Bitcoin, it has a particular monetary policy, right? It's the stock to flow that you may or may not have heard at, but it's this idea that the issuance schedule of Bitcoin is predefined and it's in the algorithm. And then, certain number of Bitcoins come into existence over time, and then they get halved as you go. And, so there's a monetary schedule there. But in the backdrop, there's also this network effect where there are more people opening wallets, right? Like you said, like accounts, and buying into the network. So when you hold one of these digital assets, you're essentially buying a piece of the network. And what you see is that the monetary policy really doesn't have as much bearing as on the network effects as you would think. So when I correlate either Ethereum or XRP, I'd say 70 to 80% of the effect in price appreciation over time is more due to the network effect than strictly the monetary issuance, right?
Or anything to do with the technical utility of the infrastructure itself.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, just from the fact that their consensus methods are, proof of work for Bitcoin and Ethereum and, Byzantine fault tolerance for XRP. Just the fact that the consensus methods are different, and that there's no such thing as mining in XRP, that really doesn't bear much difference, because what happens is that as liquidity comes into Bitcoin from the outside world, the fiat world, it eventually waterfalls down to the other projects in the space. And so it has more of an outsized effect, that waterfall, than the actual underlying tokenomics of issuance, right? So let's say, you could call the circulating supply of XRP is like half the supply, and then the other half is an escrow with Ripple or, with some large holders. But essentially, what we would call the market of buyers and sellers is about half the total supply. When you look at Bitcoin, it's already been issued into existence, more than 18 million out of the 21 million, right? And then you look at the distribution of holdings, and you find that, I think I might be getting this wrong. I'm sure somebody will correct me online, but around 5% of all of the Bitcoin wallets hold like 90% of the value.
Yeah.
So there, so the issuance schedule, you would have thought, okay, if you have a competitive mining process, it would be more fairly distributed, and you'd have this kind of ratio of kind of distribution, right? But what you end up finding is that regardless of the monetary policy that was enacted by the developers, you still have these kind of network effect distribution mechanisms that are the primary driver. And so I guess what the conclusion to me is, you with respect to other projects, they really don't even need to be that good of a project. They really just need to have a sufficient amount of traction to gain enough attention from the general public that they're likely to see an outsized return, if that's your objective, right? Some people's objective is not to, derive a return on their investment in a digital asset. Some people's objective is to contribute into the ecosystem so that, in the hopes it will solve a problem someday, right? So it will bring some utility or function to their lives or lives of other people. And so their motivations might not just be, you're going to make X return over a period of time. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that entirely answered your question, but
well, you did a great job of that. And we're gonna dumb it down a little bit for guys like myself. I'm sure the audience got this. And it's also great because it can be reviewed. That's the beautiful thing about this kind of content. You can go back and watch it again and come back to it 6 months later, and the experience that you've gained in that 6 months, you may have a different perspective on what's being talked about, or a better understanding. And this is beautiful. But let's do this for a second, because one of the things I thought was really cool about what you and I talked about on the phone is you talked about it's kind of this network effect curve, right? So you looked at Bitcoin from inception to 7 years or 8 years. I'm not sure. I don't remember which. It was one of those periods of time. Mm-hmm. And then you measured XRP right up to it, not from a technical standpoint, but just from a network standpoint. And you saw a tremendous similarity. Let's talk about that just for a minute before we segue into other topics.
Yeah, I mean, that was just a really high level, like market cap observation. So defining market cap is you have a total number of digital assets in existence, and then compared to fiat, each unit of those digital assets is worth some amount. And when you multiply the total supply or circulating supply times the current unit value, you get quote unquote the market cap. And just what I observed is that the Bitcoin market cap after year 8, somewhere around 2017, 2018, was very similar in order of magnitude to the market cap of where XRP is 8 years after creation, right? So, it's the same pattern too in Ethereum. And so what that tells me is that there's some kind of, it's that underlying mechanism that's driving the price. That also tells me though that if people are frustrated because they're not as early in Bitcoin now, then you can look to these other digital assets and say, well, you're really 2 years ago. You have an opportunity to invest in these things now and be in the same kind of phase of maturation as Bitcoin was 2 years ago, or however many number of years the delta is. And that's kind of the point, is that if network effects are really one of the primary drivers, and Bitcoin is the liquidity waterfall, then you're really, really early. You didn't miss out on any opportunities for appreciation. You're still within less than 1% of the global population that even understands this or has participated in it. So, we're all extremely lucky. It's like winning in slow motion, right? It's just, it's really more a matter of aligning your expectations with these curves that take time to appreciate value and these network effects to be realized. And I think a lot of the frustration that communities go through in boom and bust cycles is that they don't realize that there's this underlying behavior going on, and they just really need to be patient for those network effects to take hold. And when you zoom out and you see the big picture and you realize that, you're a lot more confident about your investment position. And then you start making better decisions around when to buy, when to sell, and how much. So that's what it's done for me anyway.
No, I dig it. So let me ask you this, because, I like to confirm things, right? So as a confirmation method, would it be fair to use in juxtaposition we'll call it, we'll use cellular communication, right? Take a look at the cellular industry, not a particular provider, because a particular provider would be no different than just looking at Bitcoin or just looking at XRP. But if we looked at from the time the first cell phones, these big suitcases came out using radio waves to send a signal back and forth to each unit, if we put that on a curve, on a graph, right, graphed it out, could we extrapolate linearly, or not linearly, sorry, chronologically, and see the same type of pattern? And you're nodding your head, yes, you've already done this confirmation work.
Well, actually, that's the basis for network effects. Metcalfe's law literally stemmed from the telecommunications industry, and there's actually examples of in Italy an alternative currency that they used to use for their payphones. There were these little, they're like these little coins that were issued by the telecommunications companies, and people used to actually buy them and store them for future use, and they would trade them on the open market for other goods and services, even though they were a dedicated coin for telecommunications purposes. Like you could drop it into a local payphone, it still derived the same network effect properties. And then when cellular came along, it was the same thing. It usually have a long extended period of slow maturation and then a nonlinear explosion, right? Like where all of a sudden these emergent properties become self-evident to everyone, the general population, and you get mass adoption. And part of that is, I think, there is a level of salesmanship. Like, if you're trying to sell a new asset class, let's say you're like a Fidelity or a BlackRock or something, you need to know how to sell it to your audience. And I'm not going to say dumb it down, but you're not going to go through the work of educating them through all the idiosyncrasies of crypto, right? You're going to sell it to them just like you sell an ETF, or you're going to or REIT or a bond. The vast majority of investors don't even get into the weeds of what they're buying. They just look at a few metrics like, the expense ratio or how it's performed in the last couple of quarters, or maybe like what general industry it focused on, like an emerging market or something like that. So they're very high level type of data points that then make it digestible for the general population. And I think that's what we're going to see with crypto. I think that there'll always be people who are hyper specialists and really understand what's going on. And they probably will mature into like analysts. We'll have crypto analysts, just like you have ETF analysts or stock analysts. And then you'll have a segment of the population who just realizes that there is value in that asset class and you just need to participate in it. You could ask your average grandma who has bonds in her 60-40 portfolio. She probably has no idea how those bonds work, who has them, where they're custodied, how much they yield. She just doesn't know. All she really cares about is that her portfolio was, $100,000 at the end of the month, and then next month it's $102,000 or whatever it is.
Right.
So I think that's what's likely to happen for digital assets, is they'll be digested and simplified, and then brought to kind of a general mass market via the industry that is finance and the Fidelities of the world. So,
well, I did a horrible job phrasing my question.
Okay.
So, thank you for that. That was very informational, by the way. Have you physically taken a chart of the telecommunications maturation, right, from the day that the first cell phones hit the world to 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out, for for network saturation, for participants, right? The number of participants, and then put and compared Bitcoin or XRP to that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And that was my question. And so you're seeing an extremely similar pattern emerge.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of nuance there. So Metcalfe's law follows kind of this, it's almost like n squared, which is like 5, 25, and it just keeps going up non-linearly, right? So yes, if you look at the trends of adoption in cell phone networks, you look at the trend of adoption of Facebook, you look at the trend of adoption of any social network, you find the exact same underlying behavior. Now, some of them have a little bit of a different multiplier on them, like what they call coefficient. So their growth rate might be a little different because of the nature of their industry. Like, for example, cell phones literally had a physical constraint on them, right? You had to deploy the towers, you had to get the mobile phones constructed, you had to create a supply chain that makes mobile phones. So there was a kind of a real world physical limitation. But the fascinating thing about digital assets is that all the real world infrastructure is already there. The internet's there, the computers are there, the people who understand are there. So the rate, that coefficient in that network effect is much more aggressive, and I think we'll see adoption much faster. Now, a counterpoint to that is, because we'll see such a dramatic acceleration in adoption, I also think we're going to see a regulatory response because that's kind of the nature of the regulator, is if they see a dramatic change that potentially has the ability to introduce systemic risk, then they tend to overshoot and intervene prematurely. So I do see that kind of tampering down that explosive like adoption, but it's not going to be able to stop it. It'll just kind of slow it down a little bit.
Right. So I like to look at things in terms of really simple kind of stuff. It keeps me able to go to sleep at night. And that is, so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, I honestly believe that the success and adoption, not the success of this, the end goal is that these DLT technologies become ubiquitous in the world, because we all interface with value every day in some way, shape, or form. We're all interacting with value all the time, from the very poorest to the very wealthiest. It does not matter. So with that being said, we have an addressable market of the entire population, right? That is the end goal for the network. Okay, if that's the finish line, and where we are today is, I think I heard numbers around 100 million people interfacing with these digital assets. Have you heard something different?
Yeah, less than 1% of the global population. So
okay.
Yeah.
Now, that means we've got a long way to go. But the good news is, like you said, the infrastructure, all the impediments, right? All the impediments are not necessarily structural, they're behavioral, right? Now we start factoring in behavioral economics and incentives, and and we're seeing it play out in real time with the I don't want to say migration, the adoption of proof of work protocols, the adoption of these DeFi platforms, these third-party entities like your BlockFis, your Celsius, your Nexos, that are creating value for their network participants. So I'm not going to hold you to it. Let's put a cap on this. Taking what you've learned and applying it to some futuristic timeline, when do you think this quote unquote inflection point or Cambrian explosion for the network effect would take place?
Next 5 to 10 years.
Can I get a little bit something more specific, like December 12th, 2020?
Yeah, I wish. If I do that, it'd be a different story. But I think that here's a revelation I had.
Okay.
I was born into a system not of my choosing. I didn't get to decide how to express value as a human being. It was told to me by society, right? You grow up in a jurisdiction like the United States or Europe, whatever, and you just use the dollar. That's how you express value. You go to work to earn the dollar. You use the dollar to denominate your mortgage and your car loans and your student loans and all that stuff. And that's kind of explicitly understood, that the society around you establishes consensus for value. And what this technology does is it liberates individuals from that. It provides choice. And that in itself is a radical, fundamental departure from anything we've ever been used to, because we've always relied on the law and the sovereign to establish the conditions upon which we can interact value. And now we have code, we have the internet, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we can abandon law and the sovereign, but it does mean that we have choice, and if we choose to accept the risk of that choice and the responsibilities, then it's empowering. So I think that once people get a taste of that power and that ability to express value in the way they see fit, then the only constraint is going to be the market, right? Like let's say I created a token right now, and I expected the two of you to accept it. Why would you accept it for any meaningful quantity? There's no market telling you it has any value, right? But if there's a market that instills discipline on your value expression, then really you can do that as there's no boundary, there's no bound on that. So what happens ultimately is that, if I want to send some Bitcoin to you and you prefer XRP, neither of us need to compromise, because there are markets out there that will completely facilitate that transaction. And that means that if neither of us have to compromise, then we're free in our expression, right? We can move on with the way we want to live our lives. And I think that's huge. I think that's revolutionary. And then the other piece too is, I know you wanted to focus on the number of humans that have adopted, but I think a second wave to this is going to be machine-to-machine adoption, right? The velocity of value for machines is going to dwarf the ability of humans to. I mean, we already see that with algorithms who do a lot of arbitrage on exchanges, and we see that with micropayments that are being structured into browsers. So, but I think that this next phase could lend itself to a lot of machine-to-machine payments, and that will be even a greater accelerant. So it'll take something that's exponentially rising, and that in and of itself
and then
will be
fire to it, right?
Because and then add fire to it. Yeah.
Never in the history of human existence have machines been participants in an economy ever.
No,
never.
No, they've always been the tool that enabled our productivity, but they were never in and of themselves kind of autonomous agents. And like guys like Elon Musk, they regardless of how you feel about Tesla as a company, one of the things that struck me, what he said was that you could monetize like your vehicle someday, right? If you have a self-driving vehicle, you could take what used to be a liability, something that you have to maintain, and it depreciates in value. And you can make it into an asset that kind of drives around and picks people up all day. So while you're at work and you're not using your Tesla, it's going around there and it's picking people up and dropping them off with like an Uber model, right? And so it becomes this this asset versus a liability. Now, how do you facilitate all those payments? What kind of infrastructure in the background is going to run to handle all those transactions? And what if the Tesla needs to plug into a station and charge itself up so it can keep repeating that pattern? It's got to negotiate with the charging station for the rate on the electricity. It can go on and on and on. You can take that concept and apply it.
It could pay tolls if there are
tolls. Oh yeah, exactly.
Involved. It could on demand any number of data, whether it be maybe the participant in the ride, right? The host, not the host, the
passenger.
The passenger, thank you. The passenger may want Wi-Fi. Okay, no problem. The car will stream it to you for X. Hey, I want to watch a movie while this car takes me from here to there. Okay, stream it to you, X. The car is the agent negotiating these rates and fees, collecting and distributing.
Absolutely.
It's mind-boggling. It is
really
mind-boggling. I'm a little scared because it's foreign territory. I'm not really sure what possible unintended consequences could arise.
That's right. And the best antidote to fear is education, right? Is to learn about those technologies as much as you can. And wherever you don't feel comfortable about it, seek out the people who are experts on it and understand it. And so that's our responsibilities as learning individuals, as human beings, is to figure out what we don't know and what could theoretically be a threat to us or a risk, and identify it, and then find ways to ameliorate it and participate, right? Engage versus you don't just consume. You have to also be a participant and engage. And I think I had a good interview with Humayun Sheikh of Fetch AI on Real Vision, and it was all around this idea of autonomous agents, where human beings could have code and programs that go out into the world and negotiate contracts on their behalf. But it could be applied to all types of crazy use cases. Like, imagine you're driving your car, and there's a guy who slams on his brakes, right? If that car is smart enough, it could inform all the cars behind it that it slammed on its brakes a lot faster then the human, or even like the LiDAR that the car has built in, the signal can travel a lot faster and you could avoid pileups, right? So all of a sudden now the insurance is affected, right? Because cars with this technology would pay a significantly lower insurance premium, right? Because they have the capability of avoiding risk, right? So it really starts percolating into all forms of the economy and how risk return are expressed and value, right? And so that's what I'm most excited about.
It's as a guy that enjoys the macro, that's right in my wheelhouse. And so it's fun to see the developments. And by the way, that was a great interview. You've crushed it on Real Vision. As a matter of fact, your XRP talk with Raoul Powell was phenomenal. I think you did the entire crypto space a great service. He needed to hear a counter to there can only be one. It's Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum. That's okay. We'll let it kind of ride along with us.
I caught a lot of heat for that.
Well, in good because it needed to be said. Wade asked a question. What are you invested in? Like how did you? Well, number one? Are you comfortable sharing the projects you've actually put some money in that you are following? If not, no.
Yeah, probably not.
Okay. Fair enough.
Let's put it this way. I'm currency agnostic. In general, I'll accept any project that has some real potential utility. Look, the vast majority of the projects right now are experimental. There is nothing at scale short of probably Bitcoin and XRP. There's nothing really in real world production. And
right.
On the Bitcoin side, I'll give them credit because there is institutional adoption. That is empirically, there's no denying it, right? There are people at the institutional level and retail who are buying it to store their value and protect it from inflation. There's just no denying that that's a valid, useful use case for that technology, right? So being a secure network, for now, it's going to satisfy that function really well at scale. Now, obviously, XRP is in production too, right? Ripple's using it for cross-border remittances. Coil's using it for streaming payments. It's actually being used in the real world other than as a speculative asset. So I pretty much support any project that ultimately can solve a real-world problem and has the potential to be used at scale. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see I signal a lot of my support for a lot of these projects. A lot of them I'm not even aware of them. So I may not support a project not because I don't believe in it or think that it's a valid project. I just haven't investigated. I just don't have the time to explore. There's like 2,000 cryptos right now, and there's no way that you can understand and appreciate all those use cases. So I always encourage people to tell me about their project and why are you so passionate about it. I'm on like 50 different Telegram channels following all these projects because I do want to learn and see where the opportunities are. I'd rather just be open to all these possibilities instead of discounting any of them.
I feel exactly the same way. I am an open-minded person. However, I also understand that there's a constraint of bandwidth. I only have so much bandwidth. And the last, I'd say year and a half, a tremendous amount of my bandwidth is being put to trying to understand the world of money, not any one segment of it, right? So one week I'll be diving into monetary policy. The next week I'm trying to learn and understand the juxtaposition to fiscal policy. And how these things work. How do policies even get made, right? I just thought the Treasury Department, back in the old days before I started learning, I thought the Treasury Department did this. I'm coming to find out that it's a real song and dance between Congress and it is a big rabbit hole to jump into. So I congratulate you for being so open to take in all this new feedback, because I know the learning curve just in the world of money is monstrous. You know what I mean? So anyway, I have another one. I think, you feel he answered your question, Scott? Do you feel the traditional money is coming?
No, I didn't.
Oh, he talked about institutions are coming in. Go ahead, Santiago.
I definitely think, well, let's try to define traditional money. I guess what we're trying to say there is investors who buy into traditional asset classes, people who buy stocks or gold or bonds, would they see crypto as a viable asset class? Absolutely. And the proof of that isn't even necessarily yet in the adoption. I mean, you can look at the prices, they're appreciating. I think the proof of that is in the money being spent by institutions. You look at TD Ameritrade, you look at Fidelity, you look at BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, every single major institution that sells asset classes is building a infrastructure to sell this asset class. They're all getting their ducks in a row. And also the regulatory infrastructure is being built out too. Statements from the OCC, the SEC, from the Treasury, all of these things are happening at the same time in the background. So regardless of what happens with the price, if you pay attention to what the people who have really any real say in like the United States or globally, all the infrastructure is being built, and they wouldn't be spending the time and resources to do that unless they thought they were going to get a return for it. So the only way they're going to get a return for it is if they onboard, a large segment of the population. So I definitely think that the traditional money is coming.
And
Go ahead, Scott.
What about, Santiago, the lack of supply of Bitcoin? I heard a couple of times last week that every Bitcoin that is mined right now is immediately getting gobbled up. Well, if all of these institutions are trying to gobble it up, does that mean happy times for people in the altcoin market? If there's no supply, or it's just so expensive to get, is that set of circumstances going to force some of these other traditional institutions into looking at some of the altcoins?
Okay, so I'll try to break that down in a couple of pieces, because I think it depends on how far out you look. So the first piece is the supply for Bitcoin was recently halved in early summer. So that means that every time there's a block amended to the blockchain, the reward that you get for the miner was cut in half, right? So that in and of itself is not significant to anyone except for the miner. All of a sudden, their revenues dropped in half. So from a miner's perspective, their ability to operate and pay expenses got cut really hard. But that's neither here nor there. But the point, though, is that the flow of Bitcoin into the total supply, that's what they call the stock to flow. The flow was necessarily cut in half, while the existing stock was pretty much stable. Now, the flow as a fraction of the total, so if you imagine 2 Bitcoins coming in and you have this big pile of 100 Bitcoins, the flow as a fraction of the total is very small. So in reality, Bitcoin mining and the issuance of new Bitcoin into existence doesn't have that much impact on the price. But that being said, the fact that we've been through a long crypto winter means that the people who have Bitcoin are very unlikely to sell it under any circumstances. They're what you would call the strong hands. And because of that, the supply on the open market, on the exchanges, is necessarily low. And now that they smell that the institution are coming, they certainly aren't going to be selling. So really the transactions in Bitcoin is from day traders and speculators trying to get some yield out. But the vast majority of Bitcoin is cold, and it's on a wallet, and nobody's letting go of it, which means an incredibly high upside, because when the institutions finally decide to participate, which, by the way, you may have noticed in the last month, a lot of announcements about Mass Mutual or MicroStrategy, whatever, buying big blocks. The reality, though, is that they've been accumulating that over time really, really slowly. So they've been using the crypto winter as an opportunity to accumulate. so that they could make that announcement at the proper time. So now that the market's about to kind of take off, then they say, oh, well, we just bought, 140,000 Bitcoin or whatever it is. It's a kind of a dramatic announcement, but they didn't do that overnight. And they certainly didn't do that in one buy order. They've been either doing it over the counter or accumulating over a long period of time strategically, because they want to, incentivize the market to buy, right? And I think that what will happen is you're going to get way more demand than you have supply. It's a finite supply asset, right? There's only 21 million, and there's only a certain number that are being created into existence at any given time. So the demand is going to far outstrip the supply, and therefore the price is going to skyrocket. Now, when the price does skyrocket, there's a whole mixture of people who are going to be buying. There's going to be institutions buying, there's going to be retail buying, and they're all going to get curious. They're all going to get curious because they're going to go through the same learning curve we've all been through. And they're going to see, well, okay, I made it through the switching costs from fiat to Bitcoin. That was really difficult, but I did it. Now what? What do the other ecosystems offer to me? What can they do for me? Are they faster? Maybe they had a bad experience with Bitcoin because they didn't like when they transferred it to a wallet. It took, whatever amount of time or whatever amount of fees, right? Maybe they didn't like that experience. So they say, well, what else is there? And they go try, XRP, and they're like, wow, it's settled in like a second. Like, it's shocking almost, right? So that's, people assign value to that, and they like experimenting, and humans are curious by nature. So the price appreciation in Bitcoin will naturally lend itself to then price appreciations in all the other digital assets in a big way, I think.
And Jen asked, I'll just read this one to you because you were kind of commenting on that already. Its max is 21 million. Well, what happens then? And I think you answered that when they're all created, but that's going to be another 40 years till the last one is created. But as the supply stays stagnant or slows in its growth and the demand goes up, the price goes up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty general, simplified explanation, but I'll be 100% honest with you. I don't think it will stay 21 million forever. I think it's going to likely stay 21 million for now, for like 10, 15, 20 years maybe, as long as this generation of early adopters is participating, because they won't ever agree to ever going up beyond 21 million, because they're essentially storing their value under the premise that it's 21 million. Now, if anyone tells you that it can't change, that's a lie,
right? Because
this is code. Code can always be changed.
Yep.
What needs to go with the code, though, like right now, I could take the Bitcoin protocol and copy it and make my own Bitcoin and call it whatever I want, but I would need to convince everybody else to come along with me. And that's really what these networks are about. That's where the value in these networks is in the consensus of the participants. So right now, it's in the best interest from a game theory perspective for the participants to keep it at 21 million for the foreseeable future. But that will likely not always be true, because if we understand one thing about human behavior is they don't like fiscal constraint. At some point, they'll want more to either issue into existence so that they have more loose monetary policy. And there'll be a new generation of people who are the holders of Bitcoin, new generation of miners, new generation of exchange owners. And they're going to say, you know what, let's just make it 30 million. Right. And we'll just keep it 30 million for a while. And then before you know it, they'll get good at establishing consensus around monetary policy. The problem with the old system is that you have just the Federal Reserve and the governors deciding monetary policy. The new system is you're going to have decentralized ecosystems deciding monetary policy. The exchanges, the wallet holders, the developers, the miners. And when they collectively decide to change it, it's going to be for a good reason. It's because everybody's going to benefit from it, et cetera. So this idea that Bitcoin will stay 21 million forever and ever to all time, I don't buy that.
And what about how exciting do you feel like that the Coinbase IPO is coming on?
I think there's going to be a round of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, where traditional financial institutions figure, okay, I could either build all this infrastructure by myself. I don't have the people, I don't have the core competencies, and I haven't been in this business for a while, or I could just go buy an exchange or buy a custodial service, right? So I think we'll see a round of mergers and acquisitions and IPOs. An IPO, you could have a big bank just buy a whole bunch of the majority controlling shares of Coinbase, and all of a sudden it's Bank of America base or whatever, So, there's going to be a round of consolidation as the early entrepreneurs who created these exchanges, they want to cash out. They want their liquidity event, and they'll be more than happy to sell their exchange for a couple of billion to, Merrill Lynch or Goldman, and I think the IPO of Coinbase is like one of the first signs of that, and there's a lot of other examples.
So Scott, Mr. William Agnor has a statement. I'd really like to address it because I think it's really germane to the initial question that created this topic that we're on. This is how I see it, Bill. What I've learned is that when you're talking about big money investors, let's talk about sovereign wealth funds or pension plans and things of that nature, there's a tremendous amount of risk analysis that goes into any allocation decision that any of these large funds make, right? And there's a playbook that they use. And for the most part, in the old days before cryptocurrency, there's always been what they call a penny stock market. Some of them are very new companies, exciting, doing really cool things, but they don't have a tremendous amount of liquidity. And although it may be a very solid, wonderful project, funds need to know that there's enough liquidity in anything they allocate money to that if they need to get out, they can. And so you can almost say one of the barriers to entry for some of these incredible projects that are on the board, i.e. XRP, i.e. Cardano. I mean, there's a bunch of them. They just don't have enough liquidity in the market cap that a large fund feels comfortable allocating $100 million to it. And it has nothing to do with the company. It has everything to do with what they call risk analysis that they're doing pre-allocation. Now, here's the great thing about what we've been talking about, what Santiago brought to the table. Pick any project, your favorite project. Look where it is in its network growth, right? Measured up against Bitcoin in the telecom world. You can extrapolate out, okay, well, let's see. Funds generally aren't going to invest in something lower than a 300 million market cap. Okay, great. Plot out, when does it look like my project could get to that market cap? You're probably going to be right 90% of the time, just based on that kind of formula. That's what I've been doing. I'm hearing people say, the institutions are coming. The institutions are they're knocking on the door. They're going to slam down Ripple's door. They're going to demand pre-allocation of their escrow. No, they're not. And they're not going to. It has nothing to do with how great XRP is and how useful it is as a technology and how much promise it has. It doesn't have enough liquidity in the market cap for the California State Employees Pension Union to invest in it. Mm-hmm. That's just the truth. However, good times are coming because as the overall market cap, as we talked earlier, continues to grow, the waterfall of funds from Bitcoin into other projects, mainly driven by the retail guys like you, me, Santiago, and Scott, we will get it there. It'll go from a red light on the sideline to a green light, call the OTC desk, let's set up our allocation contract. Mm-hmm. That's the good news. So it's not an if, it's a when. And you can just look at the market cap of your project, juxtaposition it to Bitcoin. Bitcoin took 10 years. Yeah. So to get to the point where it was an institutional investable product. Hmm. Ripple, what? XRP's 2 years away?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that the regulatory clarity around Bitcoin and Ethereum makes it easy for institutions to justify holding it so that they don't feel there's any kind of risk there from holding it. And then having a custodial layer, somebody that'll custody for them. Because half the problem is these investment fund managers, they have no idea how to custody this stuff. It's an IT problem, right? So you would really need a CTO in your suite, where before they never needed a CTO. If you ran an investment firm, you didn't need a CTO. Now you need a CTO, or at least you need a third-party custodian to take care of this stuff, because it's a bearer instrument. It's not, it's not held by DTCC, or you got to hold it, or you got to have somebody else hold it with the right legal infrastructure to hold it for you, and insurances and all that stuff. So that's kind of the infrastructure I was talking about earlier that institutions are building out right now, is getting it ready for all those demands so that those services are met. Because until they are, there's a fiduciary responsibility that those large funds have to their shareholders, that they're not allowed to take the risk. So even if the returns are there, the risk from their perspective is too high. But that's why I like to see kind of real world use at scale for digital assets, like cross-border, for example, because it shows that you could actually solve a real business use case and save an incredible amount of money. And that is a big motivator to demanding that these services, right? So if you are an investor in MoneyGram, for example, you're gonna start saying to Fidelity, hey, I want you to facilitate, ODL or Bank of America. I want you to use it. I want you to have the custodial service for other institutions to use it and leverage it, right? Because it does save so much money. So I think they'll be banging on the door of those service providers to do that soon. When, I think that's one of the main reasons for ODL, is this kind of pilot demonstration. I don't think it was ever meant to scale to global. I always felt it was a demonstration pilot at scale, a global demonstration pilot that can show banks, remitters, financial institutions that digital assets can, store value and settle, and then compress down what they call, T+0, T1, T2. These are these floating arrangements between settlement, where you can have instant settlement. Instant settlement is like a unicorn in the financial world. If you ever sell some stocks, you ain't getting your money for like a week. It doesn't hit your bank account.
The only instant settlement on Wall Street was the brokers themselves squaring their football wagers on Monday morning with the exchange of the $100 bills going back. That was instant settlement.
Yeah. So I mean, it's incomprehensible to a lot of these institutions to even know how to deal with instant settlement. That's how far ahead the technology is. It doesn't neatly interface with their existing processes. So.
And one of the things I wanted to touch on as well, Santiago, is we had Brian Brooks, who is one of my greatest heroes right now in the world of crypto, when he said that we were 6 to 8 weeks away from something, right? And I think he meant some type of regulatory clarity about something. It wasn't all that specific, but a lot of people got excited about it. But do you get a feel with the what looks like could be the incoming Biden administration not liking him and wanting to get rid of him? I know that a lot of the things that Trump did, they wanted, the Biden administration wants to do with it, away with it. But do you feel like that they want to do the same things with the progress that has been made in crypto so far? And then we're back to the Bitcom lady, running the regulatory clarity.
I actually think there's a much larger struggle going on politically behind digital assets in general, and it stems around who has the authority around what. All right, and an example is the Federal Reserve operates under the Federal Reserve Act and is appointed the governors by the president, and then the Congress, gives their consent, and then they essentially are supposed to be an independent body where they price in the value of money through their interest rate policy, right? And they have a charter that they're supposed to achieve employment and keep growth at a certain rate, et cetera, right? So there's this legal framework behind the Federal Reserve. Now they're working on, we know that the Federal Reserve of Boston is working on a digital dollar, right? Which you could call it a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, right? At the same time, you have other agencies who have kind of a different outlook on digital assets and saying, well, there's a role for private money. Private money being things like stable coins, cryptocurrencies, et cetera.
Gold.
Then you have gold, yeah. And then you have a completely separate faction, right? Like a third faction that says, well, there's public money, the dollar, and you can't privatize that. You can privatize all the kind of money that you want. You can have your Bitcoins, your XRPs, et cetera, but you can't have stable coins, right? Because only the commons can have stable coins. Like the government, who's the issuer of fiat, only they can guarantee 100% that dollar is redeemable. So there you go. And then the final party, just to really complicate things, is you got the Treasury. And the Treasury may say, well, we want to issue an e-dollar. So you have your CBDCs by the Federal Reserve. You have your e-dollar by the Treasury that's given that permission by the Congress and the Mint. And then you have your private stablecoin providers who want to create dollars and use them like stablecoins. And then, of course, you have your private cryptocurrency networks that are public, permissionless, but private in the sense that the government doesn't have kind of jurisdiction on their monetary policies. So all those things are happening at literally the same time, and there's a lot of forces at play. So I hate to generalize it to say, one political party or one administration or Congress versus the president. I really think they're all sorting this out between themselves. And then you add the layers of the state governments, like what's going on in Wyoming, right, with banking rules and stuff. That's there's a lot going on in the regulatory space that it'd be a mistake, I think, to generalize it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so we had, I think Jen was asking, so what's it backed with? I think she was talking about the dollar. It's the trust that they'll honor it, right? Is that simple enough?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the value of any money that we define it, cryptocurrencies, the dollar, is based on consensus. There's no intrinsic value there. The only intrinsic value is, food, clothing, and shelter, air, water, the things that we kind of need to live. But the value that we express is derived from consensus, like the amount of people who agree that it has value and the markets that form around that consensus. So the fiat just happens to have the largest consensus in the world because it has a historical advantage and it has the advantage of governments backing it. So the dollar will remain the world's reserve currency so long as the world sees it as the best unit of account to settle transactions, to denominate their debts in. And that's unlikely to change anytime soon, despite the best efforts of the Congress or the Federal Reserve to print trillions of it. It's still for now the best currency because everybody else that's the other thing. People worry very much that our government is printing trillions into existence. Every other government on this planet is doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So it's, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than the next guy. It's the same thing with monetary issuance. Is as long as you don't inflate so that your economy is hyperinflated, or that your purchasing power affects trade, you're still kind of doing relatively better off, right? But cryptocurrencies kind of enforce a monetary discipline. Like now, people can opt out and say, no, I don't like my purchasing power going down. I'm going to opt into this cryptocurrency to store my value into the future or to transact supranationally or whatever. So,
well, I love this comment by Chi-Town because we've all been hearing it. The IMF and the Bretton Woods moment. Well, what do you guys think that the Fed and the Treasury think about the IMF is going to be the one calling all the shots? But I mean, they just going to be irrelevant now?
No, that's very polarizing to say they're either the king or they're a serf. It's not that simple. The IMF plays a role, and they have played a role since Bretton Woods and the creation of the IMF, right? And their purpose has always been to have a community of countries contribute X relative to GDP equaling Y in reserve so that blank, if you fill in catastrophic event, doesn't matter, and that they would come in and help. The World Bank was that lending arm for the world. That in those were those two entities. They were like brother and sister in creation. The IMF would handle catastrophes, whether they be environmental or financial, and the World Bank would facilitate exposure for lending purposes for great works, whatever that be, as long as it wasn't building nuclear weapons to destroy the earth kind of thing. But there is, make no mistake, the United States has never shown a history of bowing down to anybody for any reason. They have always acted in their self-interest, and they stick to their guns. And it's kind of like this: when you have the largest, most well-equipped, well-funded military navy on the planet, you tend not to shy away from people getting what I call chesty, right? You know, flexing their muscles in front of you. You go, Admiral Nimitz, let's shoot one across the bow. Send this guy a message.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You know, the men with the most guns, you know, make all the rules. And I think the United States, though, I do think there will be a Bretton Woods moment, but it will be a different type of negotiation, because we are seeing a bifurcation of the world in terms of China and Southeast Asia and the West and, you know, Europe and the United States. And, you know, that's expressing itself both on the internet. You could actually see a bifurcated internet. You could see bifurcated 5G standards. You could see all types of, I'm not going to call it a Cold War, but you certainly will see a digital war. And there'll be trade blocks in that, and there'll be negotiations. And ultimately, a lot of the parties that are kind of moving towards the China side of the polarization will likely not want to denominate their debts in US dollars, because, you know, they'll be like, well, I'd rather accept a CBDC from China, and China might even condition that. They'll say, well, we'll support you in our sphere of influence, and, you know, but you have to sell us your commodities and pay them in CBDCs. So Chinese CBDCs. So I can see networks arising around digital assets that nation states issue, like CBDCs, and then you have this bipolar world of competitive blocks. And then the role of private digital assets could be to facilitate bridges between those big trade networks, right? Where you have companies like R3 or Hyperledger Fabric or Overledger connecting these very large value networks between these trade block nations and CBDCs, so you can transfer the value. So I think it's going to be pretty complicated. We're headed towards a more complicated world, not a simpler one. There's no way around it.
Well, I mean, if you want to keep it simple,
go ahead, Jerry.
Well, I was going to say, if you want to keep it simple, follow debt, follow trade. It's that simple. As more debt gets denominated in something else, i.e. Bitcoin, i.e. whatever, okay. As more trade gets facilitated in a currency other than the US dollar, those are that's really, it's that simple. Follow those two things and you will see where this is going to go.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the Achilles heels for crypto digital assets, is that we don't have full life cycles or supply chains denominated in them. Like, for example, if you're a Bitcoin miner, you pay your electricity bills in the currency of your jurisdiction. You buy your ASICs in yuan or dollars or whatever. That entire supply chain, the entire life cycle that ecosystem depends on, is not Bitcoin denominated. And that's true for Ethereum, for XRP, for all the rest. So for them to fully mature into full-blown currencies, they need to have lenders and borrowers denominate debts in Bitcoin, in their native digital assets.
All right, and I don't want to go too much longer because we normally have an hour and try to keep that strict so people have an expectation. So I did want to have Ant have that question answered, but I'm hoping that it's not going to lead us into a into a rabbit hole. So if you guys want to answer that, and then if you guys have any final comments, or if anyone in the stream has any final questions, then now would be the time to scratch your head and figure out what that is.
I have a simple, just kind of general statement, and Santi can elaborate as he does so well. Yes, right? Do I see Spark tokens being capable of minting or creating digital representations of other real world assets? Of course, but so do a bunch of other projects. One thing is for sure, and I don't know who's going to win in that race. I do know the tokenization of everything is on its way. The freedom and value and speed and, like we talked about, settlement of real world assets through a DLT process is revolutionary in finance. And, you know, it's just going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow.
And now I'll just add a little bit of speculation just to get everybody riled up we know the CEO of Flare was introduced to the X-Spring team by, Carlos Domingo, who is the CEO of Securitize. And Securitize's main function in life is to create security token offerings on distributed ledger technologies. They've used Tezos, they've used Ethereum, and we also know that those
like them.
Well, I can just say that, maybe the performance characteristics of those networks did not meet their expectations, or, the fees were high, or whatever.
What a beautifully politically correct statement that was, Santiago. Well played, sir. Well played.
So, it could be that, they're looking at a possible alternative on which to issue STOs. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Man, that was sweet. All right, well, gentlemen, thank you very much. And let me see if I've got any of the questions down here at the bottom. Okay. I got just a thank you from Harry, and we appreciate you too, Harry. You're taking good care of those animals, and very soon now we will be able to pay you in crypto for taking care of our little furry friends. I'd like to thank both of you. My brain is hurting. You are both smarter than I am, so
Your brain is hurting.
It was a little intimidating, but I understood about half of what you said. And luckily for me, it's on the recording, so I can go back over some of this stuff and learn some more. And I, again, want to thank both of you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for coming on and educating some of the people in our audience. And hopefully some more can see it on the recording of the live stream. And I hope we can do it again in the future as we get a little bit further down the road.
Well, glad to do it.
Jerry?
Thank you. Final thought. I don't really have a final thought. What I have is I have a heartfelt message for Santiago's wife and family. Thank you, Velez family, for allowing Santiago to not only work his ass off to provide a living for you, but to also spend so much of his time away from his non-productive money-making life supporting you, but studying and researching and sharing with the crypto community the insights, because he's adding value to us. I know he adds a ton of value to you, and every minute that he gives us is a minute that he's not giving you. And I want to thank you for allowing those minutes to happen, because I'm a better person as a result. So Velez family, Feliz Navidad.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And any final words, Santiago, that you'd like to sign us off with?
No, blockchain is a word that's banned in my house. It's not allowed. So this is the only time I get to talk about it.
Well, we are better off because we were able to have the opportunity to listen to you tonight, and we all appreciate that very much. And we'll sign off now, everyone. God bless everybody. Have a Merry Christmas, and hodl your crypto digital assets and diversify. Don't have a maxi attitude about any of these things. Do your research and invest in multiple digital assets. There's not only going to be one winner.
That's not investment advice. Not investment.
Do what
your research tells you to do, folks.
Correct. I mean, obviously, if y'all have not figured out I'm not a financial advisor, you hadn't been listening.
Thank you.
Love you guys. Take care, everyone.